All right. All right. So everybody, welcome to, wow, is it week 6 already? It's the finale of the AIPOS, the AI Product Operating System deep dive series. So today, probably going to run, won't run a whole hour, maybe 40 minutes. If I talk fast, 36 and a half. And basically, and if you have questions, just drop them in. Erica, let me know, and we'll cover those. But what we did in the first 5 weeks is we walked through each of the pillars of the AIPOS. I'll give you an overview of stuff, like high level. But if you're interested in any of those pillars or you hear something, all of the last webinars are up on our YouTube channel at Accelerated Innovation. So I know that you guys have a lot of free time, so you're going to love just kind of watching through those videos. I would suggest from beginning to end, but hey, you know. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is that we're going to go through the integrated controls and governance. Now, the idea is that what we wanted to, what this whole, the AIPOS is this concept of AI first delivery, right? So and I'll show you a slide where I have these predictions or basically these goals of how much AI we can do in each of these pillars, right? But the only way that we can rise to that level of AI, the more trust and control we can give to it, is if we have safe and we have governance in there. And the rise of the use of AI, we have to rise our governance with it, right? We can't do one without the other. It'll get crazy, right? So, but, before we go into that level of detail, let's kind of just briefly talk through. So, we talked about these pillars, right? So on the left-hand side, we have the define and design and rapid validation. That's really build to learn, right? And, that's not a new term. When I was working with consultants years ago, product managers that worth their salt were always talking about build to learn and getting prototypes out there, getting questionnaires out to the client and getting feedback from the client early and often, right? And so then after the second pillar, we have a hard gate, which is basically there are a couple decisions. It could be go, no go, or go with caution, right? Maybe we're pretty sure, and there are some things that we'd like to get in the hands of some customers to kind of validate it, right? So we have that hard gate, no go, no go, maybe go back to research, go back to ask questions, or go forward with some caution, right? So it's not just a cut and dry go, no go. And then once you make that decision, we put together a feature package, and then we move into the accelerated development, right? And that goes through accelerated development, deploy and monitor, and optimize and evolve, right? And again, if you want more detail on these, just if you go back to the last set of webinars, it goes through them. And so again, these percentages are how much AI, what would be a good goal for AI usage in each of these pillars. And again, you can get there, but you have to raise your governance level, right? And we're going to talk about how you can do that. And I'm not only going to talk about it in theory, we're going to go through and actually talk about what exactly you can do to make sure that you're governing through the whole process without making it a problem, right? If we're going to use AI to build things, how can we use AI to help us govern it and alert us, right? So again, the rise needs to be exactly our goal, right? So our rise in governance is going to dictate how much AI we can do, right? So these are goals or targets that I think are very possible to get to. So while I'm talking, what I want you to think about is, where does governance sit today in your organization, right? And so just think about that as we're thinking about these 5 pillars. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I'll probably bounce in and out of this story, right? But we talked in the last couple about a support team that we were going to build a workflow automation the system, right? So basically a knowledge assistant. And in general, we have things today where we are measuring things, right? So, we may have a workflow and automation, and it notices that like 15% of the tickets are starting to measure some friction in a feature. And, maybe that feature launched 3 months ago. And when it launched, had really strong metrics, right? So in a typical organization, what we've seen is that insight that in the tickets kind of dies, kind of down really more dramatic than I wanted it to, but it kind of dies in the support tool, right? And like all of our technical dashboards may be green, right? And if that's the case, then it definitely sits there, doesn't get the attention it needs, right? What we see typically happens is, you'll do a grooming session or a refinement session with your product managers. Support will bring a list of the high ticket items that they think need to be fixed. Usually it's because the customer's been complaining. So you over index on the evidence because it's an important customer. And you really don't have strong evidence as to why to fix the problem. So maybe you win that argument, maybe that ticket gets put in and you start to work on the fix. And a lot of times what would happen is you may not know the breadth of the problem, right? So you're trying to fix a specific bug, you didn't plan for the whole cleaning up a whole feature. And so what happens? You start to triage and deal with individual bugs, right? And adds all kinds of other technical debt and things like that. And so what we want to see in a governed org is this, the pattern doesn't wait for a meeting, right? So what would happen in a governed org, you'd have a feedback mechanism for your support tickets. We talked about a discovery engine that one of my colleagues, Melissa Boyle, and I have been working on. And what it does is it pulls in information from your ticketing system, pulls in information from whatever your, whether it's Jira or AHA. If you have a system, if you're having sales conversations over a product like Gong or Zoom, they can take those transcripts in, and maybe you're getting feedback from your CRM system, right? So now you have evidence and you have some context. And so what's happening now is that the system's running every day and it's starting to see tickets, and you have some AI running in the background, and it starts to realize that, hey, a majority, close to 15%, which I think is a lot, of these tickets that are coming through are related to this feature that we deployed 3 months ago. So what that would do is that would highlight the product team, and maybe even if the delivery team are paying attention, it's going to basically bring that to the surface. And before you have customers calling in, you have evidence that there's a problem. And through AI, it's kind of giving you where in your product that you have an issue, right? And so now what you can do is you can take that forward and you would take it through the same process, right? You have your define and design comes through. You're going to look at it. You're going to validate it somehow. Maybe the validation is simple. You just call a couple customers. Maybe you go through the ticket system. You can see which customers reported it and talk to them about your plans on fixing it, right? So now you go through that process and you determine, yeah, this is something we need to do. You take it into your accelerated development process and go and take care of it, right? So here's a case where it may have been popping up on everybody's radar, and somebody's got to come in and defend it and basically promote it in order to get it fixed, right? So what's going to happen is we want our system to be doing that, right? Other things that are kind of a little bit more nuanced is that maybe have a workflow piece in your product, and users are dropping from like 87% down to 71%. Maybe it's an onboarding process into your product. Maybe you're slightly dropping down. Well, you're not necessarily going to see that, right? And people don't necessarily call because of that. Maybe they just stop using it, stop using your product internally, or whatever the thing that happens. But you may not ever see that if you weren't looking at these usage statistics or this compared to something else, right? So again, what's happening is the system is feeding, and you have AI agents that are either looking for things for new features, or it's doing automated bug triage and creating PRs for developers to fix. Again, a PR is like, so for example, if you think about kind of two entry points, one is you could have information getting fed back into this define and design, And then you could also have defects that are coming in that are really more point defects, that you could have a coding agent that gets assigned a defect. And with some of the agents today, what we do is we go ahead and automatically create a safe place, a sandbox for us to make those changes. We make those changes in the sandbox and then create something called a PR, which is basically a pull request that it's kind of opposite of the way it sounds. And what that does is that alerts a developer or somebody that owns that system, it's usually a tech lead, to review that and then decide if it should move into the production branch, right? So we can have these agents going off and fixing these things for us on the fly, which is very cool. So again, the more AI we use, again, the governance, if we get those kind of things in place, we can now start to free up humans to do more of that intellectual type work, right? Instead of having to trace defects. Now, this is my my favorite slide, right? And so this is kind of the curve over the AI pillars that I like to talk about, right? And these are the percentages. Again, these are goals, right? If you get 50% on these, I think you're doing pretty well, right? And what we're going to talk about today is, you see down the left-hand side of the chart, there are things like you look at solution or architecture, and there are these blue dots, right? So basically what the blue dot means is that this governance layer leads in this area. It doesn't mean that it's non-existent in the rest of the layers. It just means that, like, so for example, if you look at solution, the solution governance is obviously, it leads, and it's more important while you're doing define and design and rapid validation. And I'll talk about what these actually are as we go through, right? So let's talk about it now. So I want to go through the 8 governance domains, and what I'd like to do is, I mean, you can read what's on the slide, but what I want to talk about is what happens if one of these is absent. So for example, we're talking about solution, right? So a solution is alignment to the outcomes this is why I don't read, right? Alignment to the outcome holds from blueprint to evaluation. So what happens is if in the solution design, I'm creating a solution blueprint, I want to know that what I decided in that solution blueprint, the features that I decided to move forward into development, that I can trace that all the way through to delivery and then evaluate them, right? And so if you can see, if that's absent, especially in the world of AI, that's the most expensive drift there is, right? This is basically a team could look like they're executing beautifully, right? All their sprint numbers, all their velocity, everything's going down. They're pumping out features like crazy. And then, in 6 months, nobody can really say, which feature the users are using or what it serves, right? So we want to make sure that, we've always talked about this move left in whenever we talked about wanting to move faster, is that we talked move left. We talked about moving testing left. We're at the point now where we can't let requirements kind of go loosey-goosey like we've been, right? We used to be able to cover that through conversations and getting a team together and taking time to talk about it. And that's usually what dragged a project anyway. So the good news is that with AI, that happens so fast. If we leave those conversations at the back end, it actually makes it worse, right? Because then we just feel like we're building things and we keep going. Right. And so if we look at the next one, architecture. So what happens if architecture is absent? Well, everything gets changed. It may look good locally, but then the global choices are wrong, right? And so until you can see like kind of the cost to change and curve bands, you don't actually see this, right? So again, this is kind of, it's underneath. You don't know if teams following the architecture, everything looks great. Maybe it gets deployed and it even looks great in limited release. And then as things start to scale, maybe you have problems, maybe you don't, but then when you go to build a new feature, it's hard to integrate with the feature you just released, right? So those are problems. With engineering, if the governance isn't there, right? So if it's absent, you end up getting these maintenance tax, right? So you compound over time. You can see green dashboards, but tests are starting to fail. You can't trust the code. So what are the engineering, basically governance things that we need to be doing on a daily basis, right? Data source and context, right? If this is absent, technically you could have a faithful answer. You see this a lot in RAG applications. Retrieval augmented generation. I always say guidance, but it's generation. But and it may look like the pipeline's fine, everything's going great, but you haven't been validating the data on a regular basis, or you haven't been evaluating your responses. And so what can happen is that your responses can drift because maybe the data is getting old, right? So you have to treat your pipeline as a production system, right? How often does it need to be updated? If bad data is getting in there, what are we doing about that? If brand new data is showing up, that can mess up the model too, right? The model is expecting a certain type of data, and the prompts are expecting a certain type of data. And if you add new data to it without doing evaluations ahead of time, the responses may drift, and they may not drift in the way you want, right? Sometimes more information seems like a good thing, but not necessarily. And then we talk about safety and guardrails, right? So if that's absent, basically, the failure mode doesn't need any elaboration. It's just you have an incident on a front page of something, right? That's bad, right? So, you do a security breach, things like that. So evaluation, if that's absent, what ends up happening is that your scores may stay green, but the quality drifts. Again, this could happen with maybe your corpus of data. Maybe you don't have a good set of measures, right? So maybe you're measuring what you consider tone and quality of the output, but you're not measuring if it's grounded. Like, did I get this answer from an actual source of data? If that matters, right? So you have to always understand that. And then if that source of data changes, what does that do to the system? How do you manage that through your systems? You need to have a pretty robust, not only evaluation framework, but also a data governance framework to keep this in line. And then from an operational standpoint, basically, this is where you get into these items. Well, hey, support knew about this for months, right? Well, that's bad. I don't ever want, if I'm running a development organization and somebody comes to me and said, yeah, we've known about this defect for like 3 months. Why? Nothing's been done about it. It's like, that's not a good thing, right? Like, I should know these things, right? So we want to make sure that all of this is coming into play. And then, if value isn't defined up front, then how do we tell if what we built is actually reaching the outcomes that we wanted, right? Are we trying to lower costs? Are we trying to increase customer score? What's that? You know what I mean? Where they like our product, I forget what that is. But that kind of stuff, right? So we don't have to memorize all these things, and we're going to trace through how like what we do with each of the 8 as we go through the next couple slides. So this go quick, and now I'm talking really long, but so let's talk about our AI assistant for a second, right? So the reason this is a good example is that it's the perfect kind of thing that it's pretty cheap early to be wrong, right? Like, if I have internal people testing it, if I get some of the answers right and some wrong, and I have only part of the data and everybody gets excited about it, right? This is our typical kind of, hey, we built a prototype and everybody's excited about it. Now what do we do? And then what happens is that the real cost for this being bad would be in production, right? If you get the wrong answers, support knowledge assistant, that's not good. It's not good for your support personnel, and it's definitely not good for your customers, right? And then it basically, if you go through all this, it exercises all of the governance pieces, right? And so what's going to happen is we have outputs at each of these pillars, right? So in pillar 1, we have a blueprint, solution blueprint, other product blueprints. The actual blueprint doesn't matter. You can encode how you want to track and make sure that happens. You have a validation decision. that decision should be validated and documented in something that can be queried, right? And then you have your release cadence. I'm sorry, your release candidates, right? And we talked before, we kind of have, three kind of versions, right? So as we're going through validation, we have the R0, which is testing kind of the unit level, like the basis, the core of the system is working. And as we get into R1, we're starting to look at the NFRs, making sure that our solution fits inside the behavior, and then any other kind of like performance or any other things like that. And then what we typically would like to see, and I know this isn't always possible, but then some sort of a limited release, because you can do all the testing in the world, but then when you actually put it in your customer's hands, them touching it and doing certain things are they're going to do things with your product, and I know we've all seen this, that you don't expect, right? So it'd be good to have that happen in a limited set. A lot of times you can do a lot of load testing and things like that, and then you get it out into the world, and people use it differently, and this typically, unfortunately, where you see load type instances where your system just completely slows down, right? In pillar 4, we talked about deployment and the scaling plan, right? So that again is documented, and we're watching that, right? So we have the scaling, the monitors, like how, if we're expecting our LLM or our application to respond in a certain time. The example we used, I think last week or the week before, was if I have an LLM app and a Gen AI app, and I expect a response time of under, let's say for some reason we agreed 5 seconds, right? And we deploy it, and it's consistently 2.5 to 3, so we're feeling pretty good about it. Then it gets out in the field, and maybe it's starting to drift up towards 5. It's getting to 5. Maybe you see some 6s, and now you're starting to worry it's going to creep up to 10. Maybe that's not a big deal, but you want to make sure that that information is, we told it we wanted to evaluate it on that, and that evaluation is going to come back, and it's going to highlight that this might be a problem. It's not necessarily a defect, right? Because maybe through the usage and people are finding new ways to use it, and they're okay with waiting 10 seconds now. Maybe they're good 15, 20 seconds, right? But at least now you have some information. And this is where you go back into kind of the define and design, and then the validation step. You'd reach out to a couple customers and say, hey, I noticed that, your response time is starting to creep up to 5, 6 seconds. When we talked to you before, that seemed to be a problem. And you talk to them, they're like, no, we love the system. We're using it all the time. And we didn't realize the breadth of information that we'd be dealing with. So actually, we're okay with 20 seconds. We didn't even wait a minute, right? And so now you have a new data point, and you can modify, maybe go get a couple more data points, and then maybe you want to modify that evaluation, right? So again, you're having these governance layers look through everything, and then your evaluation roadmap. So I'm not gonna read through every one of these, but just actually I might for this, right? So what I want to do is just kind of go, this is if we were building this assistant, right? So we want to, I think I talked about some of this, right? We want to emphasize like the data source and context, right? And because this is basically the load bearing feature. So a retrieval pipeline is really the only honest way that you're going to get really good sources and be able to retrieve it. And for the knowledge base to continue to have authority, it needs to have freshness. All the answers need to be able to trace them back to a source. And we can't think of that as hygiene or cleaning our data, but because that's really the product, right? The product is the fact that you have the data that you want. All the Gen AI app is doing is generating a response in a tone that you want, right? And then we think about the safety and guardrails for this knowledge assistant, right? Is that we can't have any PII leakage, refusal, and escalation need to be design behavior, right? So if I'm not happy with the response, it should automatically know how to move through the system. Do I immediately put a person on the phone, or do I try to pass to another AI agent to try to answer the questions? And all of this information should be decided in the blueprint, and it would be tested and validated as we were building it through the system, right? So nothing is, hey, I hope this is going to work, right? We talk about things like evidence over hope. This is where we need to make sure that we're defining those things as part of how we're going to build the system. And then as the system's running, that's what we're using to validate that everything's okay, right? And so I'll talk about this later, but I asked you before, where does your governance sit in your organization? Every organization I've seen, there's this governance at time of deployment, right? And that's way too late, right? We've all been in those conversations where we want to deploy and people are kind of fuzzy answer. And what it boils down to is you end up having a meeting and then somebody basically is trying to figure out how risky is it to actually deploy it. And then somebody makes kind of a gut decision and we go ahead and deploy, right? Maybe that's a 2-hour meeting. Maybe we're doing some prep and all that stuff, but that doesn't need to happen, right? If we're over the course of 2 months, 3 months, or whatever, however long it's taken us to build our features, if we're building up this evidence and we're running on a regular basis, then we have all the answers we need, right? And that should continue when we get it into production. And then evaluation, basically for our knowledge assistant app, groundedness thresholds, and any kind of regression. So if we have a groundedness threshold of 95% or 100%, whatever our number is, we want to watch that. And if it dips below, or definitely if we're adding new data, we don't want to add new data to the live system. You'd add it into some testing or staging environment, run your evaluations and make sure that you haven't drifted off of your groundedness scores, things like that. And to the point where you'd want to block a release if that's happening. And so for value, we should be definitely testing this, right? Did we actually, the whole idea behind putting the knowledge system was to divert X% of calls away from support so it would free up their time. And then I think when we talked about this originally, it was not going to free up their time, but then they figured there was going to be a 1 second decrease in every call length, right? Just, I think, average call length, right? Because these other things. So we need to be able to measure that, right? And that should be evaluated as we go into the system, right? We have our call logs and things like that. So we should see those numbers that we expect. And if we don't, we should make changes, right? Doesn't mean the system's broken. Maybe we need some adjustments, right? So again, the alignment, it holds to the blueprint and it goes through the evolution of serving the architecture, maybe rollback, right? Maintenance, ingesting the pipeline, monitoring leakages, and any other comms that we need from the system. So, it's distributed, right? It's not in a queue, like I said. So if you have governance as a gate, what happens, right? Everything arrives too late, slows everything down. People, I've seen instances where, you had a scheduled change control meeting and the people that worked on the feature, maybe the feature got done. I've seen where it's been 2 months sitting on the shelf, right? So 2 months, you come in and now you're asking people to verify and validate any risks that they had before. Well, in those 2 months, things change, right? People aren't thinking about this product anymore. So first of all, the answers you get are pretty vague and disturbing at times. But we don't like to do that, right? So then basically control ends up collapsing into like a couple people, right? You got the director of development. I was on a call where we had 27 people on the phone. There were 27 people on the phone, and I think we costed it out, and it was expensive, right? It was about a $50,000 phone call. And then that drifted into just at the end of the day, people just kind of gave up and we deployed the system, right? So what we want governance to be distributed, right? I talk about this in the book and about how the engineering manager who's approving PRs, and she knew they were flawed, but she was under pressure to get them released, right? This is a day-to-day, this is a daily occurrence. right? We've talked about a feature, it's got to go out. Teams tested it. They've done some demos with the product manager. And then now you have this poor VP of development sitting in a room, and they feel like something just doesn't feel right. Maybe they're having a conversation with developers, and developers, they may not tell you something's broken, but they're like, yeah, it should be fine, right? And if I get an answer like that, I don't want to deploy it either. And so we want to make sure that this is happening all through a process, not at the last minute like that. So again, all 8 domains are always on, right? What shifts is the weight of the domain while we're going through this, right? So if you think about build to learn, we're looking at solution governance, value governance, the safety guardrails and data and source context, right? We want to make sure that everything that we're building, we want to make sure that not only can we build it, but do we have the data to support it, right? We see a lot of cases when we go out to our clients that they get into this kind of we don't call it prototype hell. What was it called? Zombie, like these zombie prototypes, right? Where the prototype looks awesome, right? It looks really good, and the questions that you ask it, the answers are just unbelievable. And then you're like, great, right? We're done, right? Let's go deploy this. Well, then what you start to realize is that it can only answer 3 questions because you use a small corpus of data. So now you go, okay, well, we got to open up the data for all of our data. And then now you start to run into, can we have access to it? Can we put that into the pipeline? Is it, how often do we refresh it? How long does that take? What's it cost us? What does it do to our other systems, right? Like, if we're pulling data in, or we're creating now big queries that are slowing down our other system. So all of these things we need to think through, and might even have to have some engineering tasks as part of our discovery process. And then our validation, we may need a spike in the delivery team to go and figure out, is our data ready, right? So want to make sure that we have those controls in place, and then we can govern that as we go. And then now that we've decided to do it, you're on your build to earn side, right? So this is where architecture leads and your engineering team. And then as we move into deploying the system, the evaluation, like the interesting thing about evaluation with large language models is, when I say evaluation, I mean evaluating everything, like even our your deterministic stuff where it's a yes or no, red, green test passing. But then the extended is when we're looking at large language models, right? We want to evaluate that while we're building it, but then we need some way when we get into the system to have that evaluate the responses from our either from our applications. And then our agents, you may have multiple agents running in this system. And one of the things that we need to do and get better at, because we're not great at it in the industry yet, is that there should be an evaluator running for all of the agents, right? Now, you may actually be able to fix, because it's the agent should be focused on specific type of work. So if we have an evaluator, we could actually fix those agents on the fly, right? And so these are some of the things we're kind of researching and going into work. But the point is that there needs to be evaluation at these different levels. Now, it can get expensive. So, there needs to be some sort of a structure and a strategy on how you're going to evaluate in production. And then operational, right? Basically, we've been running operations for a long time in our organizations, right? So really what it is let's leverage what we have. So we have to make sure that as we're going through all these stages, some of this means that engineering may have to write in that we're instrumenting the statistics or the data that we need, so that gets pushed out to the different systems, right? Could be Datadog, something else, right? But we have global systems in place to manage that kind of stuff. So as I mentioned, this is how we make it real, right? So I've been talking about it. It's like, hey, we should do this, and really, yeah, it's great. How do we do that, right? But if you look at it, if we're building the system and we're following any kind of process, and these processes aren't overloaded, right? If any product team worth their salt is creating some sort of a solution design or a blueprint, right? And it may be nothing more than, hey, I looked at these three things, and we choose this way to solve the problem because we think that's better because of whatever. There's usually some risk management in there, and then some sort of, hey, we need to build this feature out like this. And then they take it into their validation phase, and they give validation and they add that evidence to the thing, right? So from solution, you should have a solution blueprint, and we can trace this with our governance, basically our workflows through our development systems, right? So once we decide that we're doing this, we can have validators that look to make sure that we have features that are created and they link back to a solution blueprint, right? And inside the repo, we can keep scope and understand what changes are being made. And so from an architecture, one of the things that the governance kit does is that it builds the architecture into the repo, the architecture definition. So now what happens is that whatever your architecture contracts, typically what used to happen is they'd sit in Confluence, and you'd have an architect or a tech lead on the team, and they would read what's in Confluence, and they would develop code and make sure that they were following the architectural standards of the organization, which is cool. And tech leads are all trying to do a good job, right? So they're all trying to align, but there was nothing really that helped them stay tight to that. There was some work done with architectural testing and things like that. But one of the things that we found with the governance kit is that we describe the architecture and engineering best practices. And what happens is then we can take the features in, and the coding agents will help us align to the architecture documents. And then and since we have the architecture documents in there, we can validate with our CI/CD pipeline, we can validate the code against the architectural contracts, right? Now, at the beginning, we kind of soften it up and just warn you, but there's no reason why we can't dial that down. I'm working with a team, and they spent a lot of time to identify a definition of done for a feature. And what we can do is we can validate that those pieces of the definition of done were actually completed, right? So now instead of doing a review, which they do now, they would have the QA team come in and do a review. That review is done automatically. And then from an engineering standpoint, we have built into the evaluation that we want code virtues and tests in a quality pipeline, right? So again, we can put these all in the gate. And the nice thing is if we have them in the gate, we can describe them to the coding agent. And so now the coding agent is following our standards. Source inventory, we take care of that, safety and freshness guardrails easily. We have our pipeline set up that it runs Sneak locally, but then when it goes through the pipeline, it runs Veracode, right? So you have your security and monitoring going through there. It's looking for PII and making sure that anything else like that is covered. A couple of the teams, somebody's been working on an agent that actually auto fixes the Veracode issues that come in. So that's kind of cool. And then part of the feature package is an evaluation criteria, right? And talks about regression. So not only how do you evaluate, but how you make sure you haven't regressed the feature as you go through this evaluation. And again, all of these things in the governance kit, you build a feature package that has the definition of the feature, has your evaluation criteria, and your NFRs. And if on the other side, you have your governance and gates defined, right? And these governance gates. And then now what happens is you're given the coding engine a harness to work in, right? And they perform really well when you do that. And so now we have the evaluation criteria. We can fail a build, we can fail a push from different stages. And then operationally, monitoring tied to evaluation pipelines and things like that. And then the value hypothesis, I think this is the thing that is still kind of weak in most organizations is we talk about the numbers, but we don't have a good way to validate it. And so one of the things that we've done with the discovery engine is be able to get into the organization's Salesforce, right? This all runs inside the company behind a gate and a virtual on its own virtual machine, things like that. So it's very secure. But what it can do is it can bring in financials, right? So now you can actually do some validation on did we reach the value that we claimed we were going to get to. All these slides are starting to look the same. So basically, basically what I talked about is that we go through each of these stages, and really what we're looking for is just divergent signals. We're not reviewing this. We don't need to review everything every day, right? This is where I think we can really leverage AI. Is that what we want it to do is we have all this data coming in, and we want it to basically assimilate the data, run some regression on it, and highlight the things that we need to go look at, right? I'd argue that having a dashboard anymore is it's useful, but I need to be able to query that dashboard, or I want that dashboard to give me information and tell me I need to go look at something, right? So what do you do next, right? So I talked about all these things we need to do. We at Accelerated Innovation have capability assessments that would help, you can go through and help you align, understand where you are in the AIPOS. And the nice thing about the AIPOS is that, we've all run large systems. You don't have to solve it left to right, right? I went into an organization and because the AI generated coding was happening so fast, we focused on putting a harness around that, cleaning that up, and then we started to move outwards, right? So then we went to the product team and worked on agents for epics and features, which kind of means, well, what do you do above that for strategy, right? So we're basically kind of ticking away at the chunks. But the nice thing about doing an assessment is it can help you prioritize where you might want to address some of these things. So if you reach out to us, we can point you to the evaluation. And so this is what we did, right? In the last 6 weeks, we went through define and design. I think you can get to 70%, but basically AI working, right? But this is basically, let's build the right thing. Rapid validation helped us prove before we commit to any money to go do something. The accelerated innovation is let's build it fast, right? But it needs to be governed. If we govern it, we can build it fast. I was working with one team. They just did a great presentation to the senior leadership team last week, and they walked through an end-to-end process where, and it was nice because they had some numbers from the last time they had to move one of their old products into the newer product. It took about 5 months and about 5 developers, right? They were able to do it this time in 2 months with, I think it was 3 people. And they know they can tighten that up, right? Because there was like a learning process on how to do it. But it was all for 2 things, right? They have AI that can help them go faster, but they spent time up front understanding what the requirements were and how to build the specs to feed to the delivery engine, right? And deploy and monitor, earn confidence in production, right? When I get something in production, I used to always be stressed. I deploy something. If I didn't get a phone call that day, I was worried that nobody was using it, right? I just expected something to break, even though I tested the crap out of my stuff. But anyway, and then optimize and evolve, right? We want to make sure that we're compounding the value. It's one thing to keep bringing in new ideas or just enhancing our current features, but if you get used to that, some of that cognitive load of what do I need to do with my new features is kind of taken care of. And so now what you can do is the things that your customers aren't thinking about. Maybe you want to go do some market analysis and do something new. It frees you up to go look at that stuff, right? So if you can get AI to do the bulk of the busy work that you're doing now, it frees you up for, I think, the important work, right? And then the integrated controls and governance, that's what makes this all safe. So the AIPOS is basically how product organizations need to convert at AI-enabled speed. You're going from idea to impact, right? Not to get all marketing on you, but if you don't have, you need the evidence and not opinion to deploy these things. Things are moving so fast. If you start guessing and thinking everything's okay, it's going to be a problem, right? So you want to make sure that the information that you need is being surfaced, and that you're moving your decisions as fast as all these new technologies are moving. So thank you. I appreciate that. Eric, if there are no questions, or are there questions?
No questions at the moment.
All right. Well, we can go ahead and shut it down. I appreciate everybody hanging out. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find us at our website, acceleratedinnovation.com, and check out our YouTube videos. All right, that's it. I'm done selling stuff. Have a nice day.